Good afternoon. Welcome back. We are about to start our next session, so if you find a comfortable place to sit, we'll get started here. My name is Jim Kelly. I'm on the Cybersecurity Advisory Board here at Montreat College and also serve in the Asheville region as Mission Health's Chief Information Security Officer for the region, for 6 hospitals and about 150 clinics. So we have a large job on our team to keep over 1 million patients in Western North Carolina safe from data breach. So all that we talk about here really is serious stuff, and it's stuff that we deal with every day. Just as a statistic for you, Mission Health is attacked about 5,000 times per hour. I'll let that sink in for a minute. 5,000 times per hour we actually get attacked from countries called Russia, countries called China, and anything that ends with a "stan" in it. So they're the ones that are constantly coming after us. So looking forward to the next speech. Today we have Pete Seeber here with us. Pete is the CEO and founder of Rocus Networks, and a cybersecurity solutions and consulting organization. He brings a wealth of business and entrepreneurial expertise to Rocus Networks from his 20-plus years of experience in professional services, large-scale consulting, and information technology. He has proven himself as an industry leader in several different verticals, including financial services, healthcare, utilities, retail, distribution, and hospitality. Prior to starting Rocus Networks, Pete served as a managing partner at Vaco, a national IT finance and accounting consulting firm. Pete was a founding member of the management team at Blue Harbor Bank in the Lake Norman area, and he was instrumental in the launch of the bank, as well as 20+ million in capital raising capital. Pete has a consulting background at Arthur Andersen and Grant Thornton and holds an accounting degree from Wake Forest University. Please join me in welcoming Pete with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for coming today. Done a lot of things, finance, accounting. I've been a CFO, I've been a CIO, have worn different hats, but what all this comes back to from my perspective is risk, because that's clearly the area that we reside in right now in the world of cybersecurity. So we're going to talk about cybersecurity and the small to medium-sized business. Let me take a quick poll of the audience. I know we have a bunch of students here today. Raise your hand if you would, if you're a student. Excellent. From the small to medium-sized business space, people that work for organizations that have 50 or less employees. Okay, good. Somewhere around 50 to 100. Okay. Say 100 to 500. Okay, good. All right. That's a good swath. That's pretty much everybody in the SMB, right? So if you talk about, it's a little bit, see if I can get this clicker working here. The SMB challenges, right? So we're going to talk about the SMB challenges. What is the SMB, right? Gartner defines the SMB in a few different paths. But if you combine what they're looking at, they define the SMB as anywhere from less than 1,000 employees and less than $1 billion in revenue, the SMB. That's a very large swath of this economy, right? We love the SMB because it is basically the American economy. If you look at the amount of products, the number of services, the amount of employment created by the small to medium-sized business in the United States, it's huge. The enterprise organization is also very important to what we do, but everybody who's an enterprise at one point was a member of the SMB, right? And they've all grown. So it's a very important part of the economy we need to protect. I'll tell a personal story. There's a very large enterprise organization that we've all heard of called Amazon, right? At some point, back in the mid-90s, Amazon was an SMB. I had a client that was a client of mine when I worked for Arthur Andersen, and Jeff Bezos came to town when he only had $1 million in his pocket. Came to Charlotte. He had a startup company, and the database that you first searched on this thing called the internet, which nobody really knew about, and there was a rumor that if you went to this thing called the internet, you could buy a book and they would ship it directly to your house. That's pretty much how the average man found out about the internet. That searchable database came from a company in Charlotte. He purchased that database from them to get his business moving. And at this point, we all know books were a test market for him, but that's where his business started, right? Lucky for that organization, he didn't have a whole lot of cash at the time, so they got shares, which turned out to be a good thing. So my point is, every business that is now an enterprise was at one point an SMB. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the SMB. The other thing that I truly love about cybersecurity is that it is the one issue that regardless of the vertical that you're in, regardless of the size of the company that you're in, is an issue of commonality for everyone. We're all fighting the same battle. We're all fighting the same enemy to get to a better point. What other issue exists where you can have the CISO of, say, Ally Bank at a table with Bank of America and Wells Fargo and all their competitors all working collaboratively to fight the same enemy, right, to create a level playing field for everyone? I don't know of any other issue that CFOs may have, right? There's a certain group of CFOs who are battling the issue of how you repatriate cash back into the country at beneficial tax rates, okay? That's fine, that's a smaller issue. But the common issue of cybersecurity across all businesses in any vertical, I think is a pretty neat thing to be a part of, and I don't know that it happens all that often. So it is a big issue we're going to try and tackle. So who is the SMB? It's the world that I like to refer to as the overwhelmed, under-resourced, and generally financially constrained, right? That's where we all live. You take your typical SMB client, and they will have an IT organization, maybe 5 people, maybe 10 people. Do they have an information security organization as part of that, or a subset, or a counterpart to it? Maybe one person, maybe half a person, maybe a third of this person, maybe half of that person. They collaborate and get it done, right? So they're a bit overwhelmed. The issue is relatively new, right? It's not an industry or a space that's been around forever or not as prolific as it is now. And they certainly don't get the budget respect that other parts of the revenue generating side of the organization get. So everybody we talk to, they all acknowledge overwhelmed, under-resourced, don't have the right people, possibly not the right tools, don't have the right controls, and they're not getting the budget dollars that they need to help deal with the issue. Yet they're suffering from the very same attacks that are coming at the enterprise in broad-based attacks, right? So they have to harden themselves somehow to put themselves in a better position. And if you think about the challenge even more, if you're the IT leader for an SMB, and you decide to do this for yourself, to fix your issue, right? You typically have, let's just call it, 4 primary tools that you have to deal with in order to build your wall effectively. But if you're smart, you're not going to just buy the first one that you like. You're going to look at about 3 deep. So now you have 4 tools times 3, that's 12. There's a little bit of math here this afternoon in this. So now you're looking at 12 different products, and more challenging than that, you're talking to 12 different organizations who want to sell you that product that are telling you that their product works seamlessly with all the other products that you're looking at, right? And how many hours are you going to spend with each of those 12, right? Now you're a week and a half of human time into just evaluating and conversations about these tools you might buy, and you're on your own to figure out if they truly do integrate with each other the right way to protect your environment. Then you buy them. So now you have to deploy them and implement them, right? And you've got to implement them so you close all the cracks in the wall. The worst thing you can do is spend the money to buy them, spend the money to deploy them, and they still look like this. And then once you do that successfully, who's going to watch it for you? Does the SMB have enough people on that information security team to watch that wall? Because information security is different than IT. We all know that. Information security, things take place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. IT, you can plug something in, flip it on, and just let it run, right? Check on it in 3 years, update it once in a while. So in the world of information security, the biggest challenge is you have to decide what tools to buy. I don't simply want to call them tools. I want to talk more about controls, how you're going to get them put in place, and then how you're going to manage them on an everyday basis to protect your business when you're financially constrained. It's a pretty big challenge. We see it every day. And then the other thing, this is what I call the common sense chart, right? I'm not going to take this back to a Harvard study or Ponemon Institute. This is just coming out of our brains of what we see every day. Cyber skills on the bottom, cyber skills available in the marketplace, it's increasing, right? Great programs like Montreat and the people that they are training and they're developing, whether it's students or professionals, it is fantastic and it's absolutely needed. However, at the left side, you see there's already a gap between the cyber skills available in the market and the increase in the threats that exist in the market. Both arrows are increasing at an increasing rate, but one's going at a higher trajectory than the other. So the gap's getting bigger. This is not going to change. It only will change based on new technologies brought to market, in my opinion, that are machine learning, orchestration-based, and AI-driven. But chasing the problem right now, the threats are outstripping the skills available to deal with the threats. And if you're an SMB, you don't have the same flexibility that the enterprise organizations have typically to deal with those. That's a big challenge. Everything's increasing at an increasing rate. So it's November now, right? So we're out of October. October was National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I just want to run through a few slides to bring some salient points to the crowd. Some of these you may have heard. We ran a big social media campaign bringing these points to light every day. Our campaign was called Digital Bigfoot. This just became a talking point for me with a lot of people that I run into. And the concept was that everybody in this room knows that Bigfoot does not exist. It's not real. But on a Saturday, if you pass by your television and there's a program on about Bigfoot, I guarantee you've just lost about 15 to 20 minutes of your life. Because you're going to hang out and see if somebody finally got a picture, instead of that one from 1982 that's grainy in the background and he's hiding behind a log. But we all know Bigfoot doesn't exist. When you're talking to executives at different businesses in the SMB, they sometimes think it's the same thing, that malware and all this stuff in the cyber environment doesn't really exist or is not going to hit them. So I started talking about digital Bigfoot and just letting them know that Bigfoot does not exist, but digital Bigfoot is very real, and if you don't pay attention, he's going to get you. Right? So here's our first slide. Better Business Bureau, how long could your business remain profitable if you permanently lost access to essential data? Less than 6 months. % of people will click on any given phishing campaign. If you've ever run phishing campaigns in your organization, you know this is true. Somebody will click on anything. And we also know, this comes from the Verizon DBIR, right? It's pretty much the Bible that comes out every year for what's happening in the security space. People will run phishing campaigns and try to bring down their click rate. I've seen it as high as 80% in some organizations, and over a period of time drive it down, right? You have to train that user group, but you're still going to have 4% of the people that are going to click on anything, right? It's like my 9-year-old, no matter what, when she's at the computer, she's going to click on something. 76% of breaches were financially motivated, right? Money's a big motivator for a lot of things, whether it's directly ransomware or it's theft of IP that eventually is going to be sold, or if it's espionage on your company so that somebody else's company can be in a better position. Financial motivator is a huge piece of it. SMBs are more inclined to pay a ransom. Notice they don't have a statistic here. People aren't really going to acknowledge that they actually paid the ransom, but they will acknowledge that they're more inclined to pay the ransom. I think that's a pretty stunning confession. But it also tells you that very quickly what a lot of people think of cyber as an IT issue, very quickly, as soon as something bad happens, it becomes an organizational issue. And once that bad thing happens, a business decision is made, right? And so people will say, we have backups, we're fine, we don't need to pay the ransom. Do you have backups of the right data? When was the last time you checked those backups? How much has been locked down? Was it one server or was it 25? And if you're going to bring up 25, does that take 4 days? How long does that take you? How long are you operationally out? So that very quickly becomes an operational decision. From a business standpoint, we tell all of our clients, John's out here, has heard him say it a lot to our clients, never negotiate with terrorists. I think that's a great business policy from our side, but we also tell our clients at times you have to make your business decision to get your business back up and running. It's an unfortunate place to be, but people end up there too often. Cyber attacks on the SMB are increasing, right? 61%. Higher in the last 12 months than it was previously. Not only are the attacks increasing, but the complexity of those attacks are increasing. Seven out of 10 businesses are unprepared to deal with a cyber attack. What's the word unprepared mean? Right? Unprepared from an incident response plan perspective? Do you have a written incident response plan? Have you practiced it? Is it in a drawer somewhere? Is it on your server and now you can't even pull it up? Did you have the right tools in place? That's unprepared. Do you have the right policies and procedures in place? Do you have the right standards set operationally? That's a big challenge for a lot of small to medium-sized businesses to deal with, right? So I think, I believe that statistic. 7 out of 10 are unprepared at some level. I walk in a lot of doors at a lot of organizations, and I think once in the last 6 to 9 months, I've walked out saying, wow, 2 thumbs up, they're great. They have it handled. It doesn't happen as often as we'd like to think it happens. 43% of SMBs have a password policy, and 68% say they don't strictly enforce it or don't know. Okay? Got to change your passwords, update your passwords, go with complex passwords, stuff we all know. No more admin, no more password 123. More SMBs are experiencing situations when exploits and malware have evaded their intrusion detection system. It gets to the complexity of the attacks that we see in the marketplace. They even have tools, they have defenses, but it's getting worse. Almost a third could not determine the root cause. A lot don't even bother. They just pay the ransom, move on, and try to strengthen their defense. And then it can only take a matter of minutes for the compromise to take place, right? All very sobering facts. Nothing new, I think, to a lot of folks here in the audience today. So if the bad guy looks like digital Bigfoot, a lot of the organizations that we see in the SMB space look like the ostrich, head in the sand. Because if I'm that IT leader and I know that I don't have the right budget, I don't have the right tools, maybe I don't have the support from the top at the CEO level or the organizational level, I don't have the right people in my team, what am I to do? How do I fix that? And we talked to a lot of our clients, and quite simply, what we learned was that their strategy is about 2 hours a week, usually takes place on a Sunday, in some position of standing, knitting, or kneeling, or sitting. And it takes place in a church. They pray and they hope that they're not the ones that get hit, because they know they've been unable to develop the business case to improve their security posture and move things forward. And hope can go for a while, but in broad-based attacks, eventually you're going to get hit. Now, the good news is, on a scale of 1 to 10, you don't have to be a 10. You can be a 7 and be okay. You just have to be a little bit harder than the other guy, right? We've all heard the expression, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the other guys that are running from the bear. And that is applicable in this situation. So you can make great strides and protect your organization by making incremental increases to your security posture. Some stories that we can get to. We have a client that is a healthcare services or healthcare technology company. They were not a client of ours, but they became a client of ours because they had a hair on fire issue. They had a ransomware event. So healthcare technology organization, right? They supply healthcare records management to their clients. Ransomware issue happened. They got shut down. All of their clients had a negative operational experience. They couldn't get their data. Their business starts to crater very quickly, right? All because they didn't have the right posture in place. So they were unprepared on the front end because they didn't have the right tools and controls in place, which allowed the attack to happen in the first place. And then on the back end, they were unprepared, and they didn't have an incident response plan in place for how to deal with it. So they're in a much better position now, growing operationally, and I meet with that CEO on a regular basis, and he loves what we do for them because he saw his business cratering. He was ready to grab the paddles, right, and the defibrillator because it was a bad spot for them. Retail industry. We had a retail client that became a client, and we went through about a 6-month process with them to help them understand the solution that they needed and the right controls to put in place. The day after the agreement got signed, before anything was done, they got hit with a ransomware attack that took down their entire environment, right? So we're in a new relationship, day one, and they have their hair on fire. So we were a bit concerned, right? Because now we've, I guess, inherited this. But the real situation is that the IT leader had a very small and thin IT organization to work with, and that IT leader was also not a technologist, right? All the more need to partner with somebody from a servicing perspective. So we were able to help them out and get them up and moving again. But these are issues, and the conversation that we had with them was they were upset with themselves that it took them 6 months to make the business decision to get the right controls in place. They had waited literally 1 day too long, or 1 week too long to get where they needed to be. Higher education. Remember the Nigerian prince emails, right? All that stuff going around years ago. He's in a different business now, the business email compromise. Large university in the Southeast was getting hit. And if you think about the treasure trove of information at colleges and universities, like we're in now, student data, financial aid data, so all of mom and dad's information now, not just the students, the alumni database of giving and how much they've given and their contact information, maybe bank account numbers for people who have donated to the athletic department or everything else. This is big exposure that people don't think about when they go through the analysis of different consequences in their environment. And then, finally, another one, Fortune 500 company that was a traditional distributor looking to make the move to become an e-commerce organization. They couldn't turn the ship fast enough because they didn't have the right culture of security within their organization. It's one thing to say we want to transform and become an e-commerce company, but the world of e-commerce is based 100% on trust. Because as soon as you put your credit card out there, you have to trust that organization that they're able to secure your data and keep it secure. Internally, they couldn't make that turn fast enough, and they got passed in the marketplace. And now that organization is suffering. Why? Because they didn't have the right cybersecurity culture and mindset from the beginning. So let's talk about risk in general. I think we all know what business risk is at a certain level, right? It's anything bad that can happen to your business, and how do you deal with that? Cyber risk, we break it down into an equation of threats, times vulnerabilities times consequences. If you're any good at math, you've noticed that's not addition, it's multiplication, right? And what happens at multiplication? The product gets higher faster. That's the bad news. The good news is if you can reduce any one of those numbers to 0, then your product is 0, right? Can you reduce any one of those 3, threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences, to 0 in this equation? It's not possible. Certain things in that equation you can't control at all. There is nothing you can do about the threats, the complexity of the threats, the number of threats, and the bad guys that are out there every day taking their lunch and going to work to a building in certain countries that have a job all day long to push threats out there. There's nothing you can do about it. 5,000 attacks a day at mission, or an hour. You don't worry about threats. There's nothing you can do about it. You worry about your vulnerabilities and you assess your consequences. The bad guys are going to do what they do. So this is the equation that we walk through that really helps people determine where they should be and what they can do. So in threats, we all know about different threats that are out there. Malware, drive-by downloads, phishing. Again, 90% of breaches and bad events start in someone's inbox with a phishing email. Password management, malvertising. Anybody with kids at home, one of the really nasty things right now is malvertising with all the games, all the websites, everything that kids are going to live their life and have fun. There's so much nefarious stuff out there to click on. That's just, and I say that because I have 4 kids and they click on a lot of stuff, and I try to take what we do at a professional level and bring it into the house. So there's absolutely some exposure there to be concerned about. And then who are your typical attackers, right? And what I'll point out here is we talked, I think it said 76% of attacks were financially motivated, right? So amateurs, money, hackers, extortion, organized hackers, wealth. Money's a huge motivator on all sides. Here I just want to point out 67% of SMBs say their current technologies can't detect or block most cyber attacks. 67%. So why have them? Why have them in place if you know that they can't detect, right? If you're living with legacy technology, you have to start making the move to improve your posture. So let's talk a little bit about vulnerabilities, because I think this is the point where you can do a lot about your environment. And I don't mean vulnerabilities in the sense that you did a vulnerability scan, you got a report, and it tells you where to patch. I take a broader definition of what we're talking about with vulnerabilities, right? Vulnerabilities are any control that you can put into your environment to reduce the risk. If you're not going to worry about the threats, the only reason you're really not going to worry about them is because you've taken as many steps as you can possibly take to reduce the vulnerability of your environment. You've put more controls in place, and you've given yourself a better opportunity. So some common vulnerabilities that everybody sees. No email security in place. Does anybody believe that Office 365 is a security-driven tool? It's not. It has a spam filter, and it's going to collect some stuff. And if more than 90% of bad attacks take place emanating from email, you'd be surprised how many organizations haven't taken the step to properly filter and control what gets to the inboxes in their organizations. Do you have an email gateway that looks at attachments, PDFs, looks for malicious URLs and removes them? Quarantines suspicious emails coming from suspicious places, right? That's a huge one in my book. No advanced endpoint protection in place. This is a sticking point for me. I get passionate about this one because we're all living with some legacy technology and signature-based antivirus. In my opinion, quite simply, it doesn't work. And I think we all know it doesn't work, but we've been trained to accept it anyway. Statistics will tell you that On average, signature-based AV works about 40% of the time. Doesn't matter the manufacturer or the OEM. You blend it all together, it's about 40%. That means it has a 60% failure rate. But we accept that as good enough because everybody keeps putting it in place in their environment. And you need to pull the plug on it. If my child came home with a 60 on a math test, I would sit them down and we would study and we would get smarter and put a plan in place to get up to the acceptable level of an A or 90%. But for years and years, we still keep accepting what's being pushed down our throat in the marketplace that signature AV is the only answer. I don't think that it is. So I'd implore everybody to start looking at different answers. There are products out there based on artificial intelligence, machine learning, that up the ante to north of 90%. No formalized software patching program in place, right? This is like brushing your teeth every night. You can't brush your teeth once a month and go to the dentist and expect to get a clean report, right? You need to have some vulnerability scanning on a regular basis and institutionalize what you do with the results from that. No hard drive encryption, the use of multi-factor authentication. I think we all understand this on a personal level about our phones, right? If you sign into your Gmail account from a different computer somewhere, you're going to, if you've signed up for two-factor, they're going to send a code to your device, right, to your handheld, and then you enter that code in, right? It's something you have and something you know. Something you know is your password. You know it in your brain. You type it in. Something you have is the code they send you, right? Same thing in your business environment at critical layers to make sure that only the right people have access at the right time. Lack of equal protection for cloud, mobile, and remote users. That's a big one, whether it's VPN. Everybody's moving their data, right, from on-prem to the cloud, and you have to look at how, I think people kind of have a good handle on what they're doing with the data and how they're protecting it when it's on-prem. In the cloud, I think people are making a lot of assumptions about how other people might be protecting their data. And what are you doing with that data when it traverses back into your environment? No formal policies and procedures in place, and that is a crossover to human resources anytime that you onboard a new employee, making them accountable to how the organization functions and what they can expect on a daily basis in terms of action. No formal incident response plan in place. That's a huge one, huge. So consequences. Business consequences of a breach. This is, let's see, Atlanta, right? So I think about 6 months ago, Mecklenburg County here in North Carolina, Charlotte area, they got shut down with a ransomware attack. I live in Mecklenburg County. It was on the news every day for about a week and a half. And you see the consequences, right, of, okay, so do we pay the ransom, do we not pay the ransom, right? Can we get all the backups in place? Can we move it forward? They couldn't. They didn't pay the ransom. It took a long period of time. Services were disrupted. And that was to the detriment of a lot of people in the county. And when you're talking about services where you have elderly people who cannot get around but have to take medicine every day, and there's a county service set up for volunteers to go pick up their medicine, drive to that person's house, and help that person dispense their medicine on a daily basis. And then that person doesn't get their medicine for 9 or 10 days because the county's suffering ransomware, right? These are the discussions that need to take place when you start talking about consequences. And then, a month and a half later, Atlanta gets hit. Same thing. I don't live in Atlanta, but my friends who do live down there were telling me the same thing. So, side consequence to Atlanta, I don't know if this was a factor or not, but apparently Amazon lost interest in moving HQ2 to Atlanta when that happened, right? So I talk about consequences, and I tell people all the time that as an IT leader, from a cyber perspective, you have to get your house in order and all the basics before you can expect to sit down and get all the other executives around a table to talk about the consequences of what's going to happen in a cyber attack. I was talking to someone the other day who's a CISO at a Fortune 500 company in Charlotte, and he said something very insightful. He told the group, he said he has never had a successful security initiative that originated from the security group. Successful security initiatives originate from the other business units who recognize that there's a horrific impact on their part of the business if they don't handle it correctly. Because if it's always the security organization that's bringing up the issue and what has to get done, what do they hear? I'm here to slow you down. I'm here to make your job harder. I'm here to restrict you. That's just what they hear. But if you can get the other business leaders in the organization to start thinking about the consequences to sales and to operations if there were some sort of attack, and get them to recognize how it affects their part of the business, have an executive roundtable discussion where the security leader doesn't have to be shoving fear down everybody's throat, because half those people won't show up at the meeting to begin with. They don't really want to listen to you talk about that. But if you can have the meeting before the meeting, plant the seed, and have it become their idea about what they need to do or what the organization needs to provide to them so that catastrophic event doesn't happen to operations or to sales, right? You're going to be much more successful in accomplishing a security goal. Right? I thought it was a great comment, and it makes sense. If you've been around that table trying to get executive buy-in, you're going to have the operations leader just kind of check out. Because when that fatal event happens, the operations leader might do this. It's not my fault. I can't push sales if all the service got cut off to our clients and we just lost 2/3 of our revenue base, right? But if you get them involved on the front end, it can certainly help. So I think a big part to, if you went back a slide, or to talking about vulnerabilities, the way to create opportunity to improve your vulnerabilities, to improve your posture, is to have a more global discussion about consequences to the business, because people then will begin to understand what they need to do to prevent something very bad from happening. So in risk strategies, this is, how do you deal with the risk once you've identified what it is, right? So there's four typical ways, right? Risk avoidance, risk transfer, risk mitigation, and risk acceptance, okay? Risk avoidance. You cannot unplug everything in your environment and open your business. It's just not feasible. You can't avoid the risk. It's there. You have to deal with it. Risk transfer. Typically done through insurance, right? We have clients. I implore everybody to have some level of cyber insurance in their business. You will need it at some point. It can become helpful. However, controls and insurance are not an either-or proposition. It is a both. You need both. Okay? The good thing about insurance is that you can help with financial recovery on the back end. It helps, but it may not bring trust back from your clients. All it's going to do is put money in your bank account to possibly work on recovering, or paying the lawyers, or paying the other IT firm that came in and had to clean it up. Okay? It's kind of like life insurance. When the life insurance proceed check comes in, great, you have money, but guess what? You're still dead. Okay? You're going to be in the last phase. So I tell people all the time, you need cyber insurance, first-party coverage, third-party coverage, but don't think of it as a replacement for the controls that you should have on the front end. It's not a place where you want to be. Risk mitigation. This is the big part. This is where we live, and this is what we try and deal with every day in a control environment. You have to look at the risk to your business and properly mitigate that down to an acceptable level. On a scale of 1 to 10, if you're a 2, how do you figure out how to increase that to get to the right level? And what is the right level? Do you need to get to a 10? Or is 7 good enough? I'm a big advocate for 7. Because the incremental spend that you have to make to get from 7 to 10 in the cost-benefit analysis might not be worth it. I say identify those partners that you need when your hair's on fire between 7 and 10. Know who to go to, know where to go, know what questions to ask. But you don't need to own that responsibility yourself. So get the plan in place to get from a 2 to a 7, and what are the incremental steps to be there. And that's what accept is, right? Accept the risk between 7 and 10. That it's not worth the spend to get there, right? Let's talk about frameworks for a minute. Cybersecurity frameworks, there's a bunch of them out there. NIST is probably the most commonly accepted, as well as the CIS-20. We work a lot with that. What I like about NIST is that it's the federal government's attempt to create a universal platform for standards and outcomes, right? It is not a checklist. It's a framework. I would caution everybody that as you go through it, and on our resources page at the end, we can give you some information on where to go. And there's the entire NIST framework, and then there's the small business, more digestible Cliff Notes version of the NIST framework, right? Easy to digest, easy to understand, much easier to implement. There's some great knowledge in there. But please don't get twisted around the axle. I've seen so many organizations from a compliance perspective get paralyzed in trying to stack rank and prioritize. I think the important thing, if you go back to the analogy of not having to be faster than the bear, just be faster than the other people, the important thing is to get started and do something. And what you're doing, make sure that it attaches to the framework, and eventually you'll start closing off and closing down all those boxes. Brief overview of the NIST framework, 5 critical parts: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. You want to try to spend the majority of your time in the first 4. If you're spending time in recover, right, then you're in a bad place. But you want to make sure that in recovery, right, that's insurance, that's backups. Make sure you have all that stuff in place. Make sure that you have a documented practice and known incident response plan so that when stuff happens, you know how to handle it, and other people in the organization know how to handle it. Cybersecurity is not an IT issue. It is an organizational issue. And that's probably one of the bigger challenges for the security leader or the IT leader, is to get the buy-in from the CEO and maybe the executive team to understand what all that is, right? So that's when I get back to the point I made earlier, and people don't like me saying this, but you have to get your house in order, because if you want that executive group to take you seriously on your concerns, then they can't look at you as the person that spent $1 million last year on a tool that only got 30% implemented. You have to utilize and understand the tools that you currently have in place. I can't tell you how many times we've been inside an organization and they want us to come in and help, and they start asking about tools and what can they do. And the first thing we do is slow down and say, well, let's look at what you already have, right? What do you have that could deal with some of these issues? And unfortunately, in today's world, the tools in the marketplace and the controls in the marketplace are sometimes there longer than the executive or the team members. So they inherit a bunch of stuff that they don't know fully what it is, when it expires, what version they had, and you have to go through this discovery period on your team to find out how to baseline your environment before you just start spending more money, right? So you have to get your house in order if you want your voice to be respected at the table when you're addressing these issues. Risk mitigation, security as a service. So this is, you hear a lot of people talking now about the SMB and what option is out there, right? There's another math portion of this program that I've got to get to that helps people understand where we're at on this, because it comes down to the highest and best use of the limited resources that you have at your disposal in your typical MSB or SMB, sorry. Highest and best use. So typically, 85 cents of every dollar in an IT budget are already spoken for when your budget cycle starts. So you have about 15%, 15 cents for every dollar that you can spend on new initiatives. So what's the 85 already spent on? It's spent on the people on your team, the products that you already have, the renewals that you're already committed to, all the things that are already in place, right? So you get down to 15 cents of every dollar in the IT budget to deal with new things. And typically the security budget is a subsegment of the IT budget. That's somewhere between 3 and 5%. So run that math. 15% times 3%, that means you have less than half a penny out of every dollar to commit to new initiatives. What in the world are you going to do with that? Honestly, not much. depending on the size of the organization. So what you have to do is reevaluate what you're doing with the other 85%. Because I've been a CFO before. CFOs don't like saying no, especially when they know it introduces risk to the environment. But they can't be in a position of saying yes to everything. They're going to acknowledge, they're going to say, yes, that's important, but they're also going to tell you you're in a budget-neutral environment and spin you around. And what they're saying is go back and find out what you're already spending money on and free up some money so you can find your own new money, right? So what tools, what licensing, that $1 million tool that you only implemented 30%, what's the usefulness of that? You know, do we need the licensing for the other part, right? So you have to get creative. And this is a difficult spot for a lot of new leaders that come into organizations to really evaluate that. But again, that falls very much right in the middle of getting your house in order so you can develop the good business case for that. So security as a service, what is that? That's partnering with an organization to take all of that complexity off of you and own it themselves. So about 45 minutes ago, I was talking about buying 4 products and talking to 3, looking at 3 different products, and now that's 12, and that's 12 salespeople, and if you're going to give them 5 hours on average in a discovery period, so all that, you get all that time back, all that complexity, and all the problems of buying those products and putting them together. Hand that to an organization that does it 7 days a week and twice on Sunday, right? But you have to look at those organizations and talk about how do you protect my environment, right? What kind of information do you provide back? A lot of people get into SOC monitoring. That can be great. They take data feeds, they correlate all that information, and then they alert you. And they don't do anything, right? So now your team's just getting hit with a bunch of alerts, and you're not sure what to do with it, right? So in the process of evaluating security as a service or partnering with folks, you want a holistic solution. The right tools, looking at the right information that are monitoring, alerting, taking action, remediating, actively keeping you safe, right? Otherwise, your team's just going to get inundated with more information that they can't do anything about. Strike a balance between IT and security, right? This has always been a problem. We see more organizations that are now taking the security function and making it a report under the risk part of the house, and not necessarily IT, because said crudely, the IT organization is meant to keep it's the gas. It's meant to keep the organization going quickly and have resiliency that it's always there, right? Security might be looked at as slowing it down. So people are separating those two so they have the proper checks and balances in place. Providing defense in depth. If you're going to go with an organization that provides security as a service, what services are they actually providing you, right? Is it network, perimeter, endpoint, email, vulnerability scanning, monitoring, alerting, taking action? Are they helping you establish an incident response plan? All of those pieces together. So, and this is, I think over the last 3 years, we've really seen the space move in this direction, where people have acknowledged, based on the constraints in place and the challenge in front of us, and if I went back to the other chart that showed the increasing gap of skills available in the marketplace versus the trajectory of the complexity and the number of threats, it's only getting bigger. So people have looked at it differently and said, you know what, this isn't what we do very well. We make widgets really well. So let's focus on making widgets and let's keep our IT environment going, and let's hand off security to the experts who can keep us safe on a full-time basis. I'll talk about this real quick because I'm running out of time. We've got to get to the next segment. Here's 8 questions on cybersecurity that I think everybody should go through and understand, and go back to your environment and talk to your IT team or your IT provider or to your cybersecurity provider to walk through these. They're available in our resources section that I'll get to, so you can copy that down real quick. Up top, Rocus Networks resources page. There's some great questions that are thought-provoking to see, where you might have, what I generally refer to as vulnerabilities in your environment that you'd like to patch up and put together to close, close down the vulnerabilities and increase your posture. Some other great resources out there for the SMB, the National Cybersecurity Alliance, very helpful. There's a ton of information out there for SMB companies. The NIST Framework is up there, and there's a direct link as well to the NIST Framework for small and medium businesses. The two at the bottom, I like these a lot. The Cybercrime Support Network, it's new. There's a new site launch for that coming out on November 8th. The woman who created that organization is a lady named Kristen Judge, who's a dear friend of ours. She used to be the executive director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. She helped that organization get up, get moving, and really making an impact, and now she's broken out and started this second organization, which is doing great things. And then the last organization is called the Whitehawk Marketplace. That is a cyber marketplace built specifically for the SMB. You can go to that site, and they have a function in there where you can essentially type in what your concerns are and a little bit about your environment, and it rips through its library, and it lists, here's 4 vendors that you might want to talk to based on what you said your concern was. So it takes this universe of choices, and it brings it right down to something that's digestible to you, and it's bringing you solutions that are made for the SMB, right? It's not going to, I think one of the biggest risks is when you're making decisions is that you make a decision for an organization that doesn't fit who you are, right? They will put you in a bucket. White glove service, you're either an A client, B client, C client, or some client that sends us a check every month that we don't really pay attention to. You don't want to be in the C or the D bucket. You want to make sure you're with an organization that puts you in the A or the B bucket, and that's what Whitehawk is really good at. Anything else? Any questions? I covered a lot. Hope some of it was insightful. Yes? Sure. See if I can back this up here. There you go, 1 through 4. So yeah, email gateway in place. We talked about that a little bit. Do you have advanced endpoint protection in place? Again, this is just a personal stickler of mine. It's broken, it doesn't work, stop buying it. Stop allowing these organizations to put it out in the marketplace and having us consume it. It's like the Joe Camel of the cybersecurity space. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.